At 4:22 on a Sunday afternoon, my grandmother pushed me behind her pantry door and whispered, "Do not come out no matter what your father says." I had not seen her in 4 months. I had driven 3 hours without calling because it was her 82nd birthday, and she was the only person in my family who still answered when I said I was innocent. My grandfather, Arthur, had barely taken my coat when headlights swept across the kitchen window. Grandma looked outside and went pale. "Your father," she said, "and Caleb." I thought she wanted to hide me because she was afraid of a fight. She opened the narrow pantry door and moved aside a bag of flour. "Get in, Grandma. I'm 35 years old. Then you are old enough to listen before you defend yourself." I stepped inside. She pulled the door almost closed, leaving a line of yellow kitchen light across my shoes. A metal recipe box sat on the shelf beside my hand. It was the same faded green box she had owned since before I was born, labeled bread, cakes, and Sunday dinner. 3 minutes later, my father entered the house without knocking. Caleb followed him, carrying a leather folder. "Where is Ethan?" my father asked. Grandma did not answer. Caleb placed the folder on her kitchen table. "We know he still talks to you. The company refinancing closes Friday. We need him to sign the admission before then." My father said, "Admission to what?" My father's voice became colder. "To taking the money." 1 year earlier, that answer would have pulled me through the pantry door. 1 year earlier, Douglas Ward had not merely been my father. He had been the measure I used for the man I hoped to become. Ward Restoration Group began in my grandparents' garage, with 2 ladders, a used truck, and a notebook Grandma kept beside the telephone. By the time I was 35, it employed more than 200 people, repairing buildings damaged by fire, storms, and flooding. My father was its founder and chief executive. My older brother, Caleb, ran operations. I was the financial controller. I managed budgets, insurance reserves, payroll reconciliation, and the employee relief fund that helped workers after injuries or disasters. My approval code appeared on thousands of legitimate transactions. My electronic signature sat inside the accounting system. I had access because my father said trust was the only thing a family company possessed that competitors could not buy. I believed him. The internal audit began after an insurer questioned irregular withdrawals from the employee relief and insurance reserve. $640,000 had moved through 2 companies I did not recognize. Northline Equipment Consulting, Red Creek Development Services. The invoices described emergency equipment purchases. No equipment existed. Every transaction carried my approval code. Several confirmation emails came from my account. 2 payment packets included my electronic signature. The internal report even contained a timeline showing that I had reviewed the vendors and overridden normal controls. I had done none of it. At first, I assumed someone had made a systems error. I asked Caleb for the server access history. He told me information technology was preserving it. I asked my father to delay the board meeting until an outside auditor could review the records. He put a hand on my shoulder and said, "If you are innocent, the truth will survive the meeting." Then he entered the boardroom and destroyed me. He told the directors he had discovered that his younger son had exploited family trust. He said he was devastated but would not place blood above the employees whose benefits had been stolen. Caleb sat beside him and said he had noticed changes in me for months. I had become secretive, defensive, obsessed with authority. None of those claims was specific enough to disprove. That made them useful. The board terminated me before sunset. My access was disabled. Security escorted me from the building carrying a cardboard box. By the following morning, vendors knew. Within a week, every company where I applied had heard a version of the story. The speed had been deliberate before the board meeting. Caleb had prepared a communication package for department heads and major clients. It described my termination as the result of a completed internal investigation. The message went out 11 minutes after the vote. before I had reached the parking lot. My father recorded a short statement for employees. He said no founder should ever face the choice between protecting a child and protecting the people who trusted the company. His voice broke at exactly the right moment. Workers I had helped through medical claims watched him describe me as the person who stole from their reserve. The next day, a payroll supervisor named Nia called me from her personal phone. She had worked beside me for 6 years. "Tell me there is something wrong with the report," she said. "There is." "Then why did Caleb say the server records confirmed everything?" "Because I have not seen those records." She was silent. "I have children, Ethan. I cannot be involved." She ended the call and never contacted me again. I survived on temporary bookkeeping work while full-time applications ended as soon as employers contacted Ward Restoration Group. My father stopped answering my calls. Caleb sent one message telling me not to make things worse for the family. My aunt said Douglas had shown courage by refusing to protect me. Friends who once asked me to review contracts became too busy to meet for coffee. My mother sent a letter instead of calling. She wrote that she loved me, but needed time to accept what I had done. She included no question mark anywhere on the page. Civil claims followed. A criminal investigation remained open. I was not charged, but the possibility sat behind every job interview. Employers heard $640,000 and ended conversations politely. Douglas eventually offered me a way out. His attorney sent a voluntary admission and restitution agreement. If I signed, the company would limit its civil claim, recommend against criminal prosecution, and allow me to repay a reduced amount over time. The document also required me to waive every claim against Douglas, Caleb, and Ward Restoration Group. I refused. That refusal became further proof of guilt. Only Grandma Ruth called every Sunday. She never told me everything would be fine. She asked precise questions. Which transactions had I approved personally? Where had I been on the transfer dates? Who controlled administrator access? Which bank mailed statements to trustees? At first, her questions made me angry. I thought she was testing whether my story changed. One Sunday, I accused her of conducting another audit. "I am trying to learn which facts existed before the report," she said. "Why does that matter if no one will listen? Because listening and proving are different jobs." She asked me to write down every place I had been on the transfer dates. I mailed her a copy of the conference program and told her about the dental surgery. She never explained why she wanted them. 4 months before her birthday, she stopped asking questions. "Are you giving up too?" I asked. "No. I have reached the part where talking creates more risk than it removes." I did not understand. I was too exhausted to press her. When her birthday arrived, I drove to her house because I needed to see one person look at me without first seeing the accusation. I brought a bakery cake and the wool scarf she had admired the previous winter. Arthur opened the door, hugged me, and immediately checked the road behind my car. Grandma took the cake but not the scarf. "Why didn't you call?" she asked. "I wanted to surprise you." She looked toward the pantry. "You did." When I asked whether she believed me, she said, "Numbers do not choose sides. They wait for someone patient enough to read them." I mistook that for caution. From inside her pantry, with my father demanding that I confess, I began to understand it had been a promise. Grandma stood beside the kitchen table. I could see only the lower half of the room through the narrow opening. My father's polished shoes stopped near the leather folder. Caleb pasted beside the refrigerator. "And what happens," Grandma asked, "if Ethan refuses to confess to something he did not do?" There was a long silence. Then Caleb laughed. "We already destroyed his reputation. Nobody is going to believe him now." My father corrected him. "I destroyed his reputation." My hand closed around the pantry shelf. Arthur shifted his chair. "You are admitting the report was false." "I am admitting we no longer have the luxury of reopening it." That was not the question. Douglas sighed as if my grandfather were wasting his time. The company had a liquidity crisis. Hollow Ridge was close to default. Emergency funding was moved, and we intended to replace it before anyone noticed. Grandma asked, "Moved through companies Ethan had never heard of?" Caleb stopped pacing. "This conversation is over." "Caleb arranged what needed arranging," Douglas said. Arthur leaned forward. "And you approved it." "I approved emergency funding." Grandma asked why Ethan's credentials appeared on the transfers. Douglas waited before answering. His access was the only access that would survive the first review. The pantry seemed to contract around me. For a year, part of me had wondered whether I had made a mistake so large I could no longer see it. Perhaps I had approved the wrong file. Perhaps someone had warned me and I had forgotten. When enough people agree that you are guilty, memory begins defending itself like an accused person. Now my father had spoken the truth in the kitchen where Grandma once served me apple pie. Arthur asked what happened when the first review failed. Someone had to absorb the damage. Grandma's voice lowered. "So you chose your son. Caleb has children depending on him. Ethan does not. He is younger, he can start over." Grandma asked what starting over meant after an accusation of employee benefit theft. "He changes industries," Douglas said. "Changes cities. In 5 years, no one remembers. Ethan remembers. Then he learns to live with it." Caleb's voice came from near the table. "We are not doing this because we hate him. We are doing it because losing one person is better than losing the company." "Did Ethan receive a vote?" Arthur asked. "He made himself the obvious choice when he built so much access into his position. My own diligence had become part of their justification. I had centralized reconciliations because my father demanded tighter control. I had accepted responsibility because I believed the company needed someone the family trusted. They had turned that trust into opportunity. I nearly opened the door. Arthur appeared in the narrow line of light. He did not look toward me, but his hand settled against the pantry door. Holding it closed, my father continued. "The refinancing is the only way to stabilize the company and restore the employee fund. The bank and insurer need the old shortage resolved. Ethan signs the admission, accepts the restitution plan, and releases the company. Then everyone moves forward. Everyone except Ethan," Grandma said. Caleb tapped the leather folder. "He already looks guilty. The signature just makes it useful." Arthur's fingers pressed harder against the door. "What if he refuses? Then we make clear that he is avoiding responsibility," Douglas said. "He has no job, no credibility, and no money for a prolonged lawsuit." The truth stopped mattering the day everyone believed the report. Grandma answered without raising her voice. "Truth does not stop mattering. It only waits for the report to be corrected." Caleb laughed again. "Mom, this is corporate finance, not one of your old ledgers." My father told Grandma she had until Tuesday to convince me. If I appeared at the special board meeting on Thursday and signed, the refinancing could close. Friday, if I did not, the company would announce that I had rejected a final opportunity to make restitution. "Tell him I am trying to protect what remains of his future," Douglas said. I heard the front door open, then close. No one moved for several seconds. I pushed against the pantry door. Arthur kept his palm against it. "Let me out. Wait until the car leaves." I heard him confess, and he will deny every word before he reaches the highway. The engine started outside. Gravel shifted beneath tires. Only then did Arthur open the door. I stepped into the kitchen, shaking hard enough to knock the leather folder from the table. I should call the board right now. "And tell them what?" Arthur asked. "That you heard a confession through a pantry door. You both heard it. A confession heard through a door can be denied. A bank record cannot." Grandma locked the front door. Then she returned to the pantry, reached past the flour, and lifted down the green recipe box. "I did not spend a year proving you were a good man, Ethan," she said. "I spent it proving they were lying. My father had spent a year telling everyone I was a thief. Behind my grandmother's pantry door, I finally heard him admit I had only been convenient. Grandma placed the green recipe box on the kitchen table, but did not open it immediately. I wanted names, dates, and something I could put in front of the board before my father reached home. She wanted me to sit down. "We have 4 days," I said. "I have already used a year. You can give me 10 minutes. Arthur collected the leather folder Caleb had left behind. Inside was the voluntary admission and restitution agreement with yellow tabs, marking every place I was expected to sign. A cover letter described Thursday's meeting as my final opportunity to resolve the matter before the refinancing deadline. Grandma opened the recipe box. There was not a single recipe on top. The first item was an original bank statement for the Employee Relief and Insurance Reserve. It showed a transfer of $85,000 to Northline Equipment Consulting on a morning I had been attending a risk management conference 2 states away. Beneath it was the cancelled check image. My approval code appeared on the internal reference line. The endorsement belonged to an account at another bank. Grandma placed a second statement beside it, then a third. "How did you get these?" I asked. "They were mailed to me." When my father created the employee fund, Grandma had been named as one of its trustees. The role became mostly ceremonial after she retired, but no one had removed her. She still received quarterly statements, annual notices, and copies of unusual transaction reports. Douglas and Caleb had forgotten because they considered her signature a piece of company history rather than current authority. Grandma had kept the company's first books at a folding table in the garage. Douglas handled estimates and crews. Arthur repaired equipment. Grandma recorded every payment, chased unpaid invoices, and made certain payroll cleared before anyone in the family paid himself. When Ward Restoration Group expanded, professional accountants replaced her daily work. The employee reserve remained partly her idea. She had watched one of the first crew leaders lose his home after an injury, and she insisted the growing company create a fund that could cover emergencies insurance did not. Douglas named her trustee during a ceremony photographed for the company newsletter. Years later, he spoke about the appointment as a tribute to where the business began. Tributes are easy to ignore until they still carry legal rights. After the first inconsistent statement, Grandma called the bank from the number already registered to her trustee profile. She requested duplicate statements and check images available under the fund agreement. The bank verified her identity and mailed everything to her home. She logged each request in a small notebook. If a page arrived late, she recorded the date. If the bank sent a copy rather than an original statement, she marked that too. Leah had advised her not to write on the documents themselves. "I was not building your defense at first," she told me. "I was doing the trustee job your father assumed I had forgotten." The distinction mattered to her. She had not begun with a conclusion and searched for pages that supported it. She had begun with a missing balance and followed the questions it created. "I did not enter the office," she said. "I did not open anyone else's mail. Every document in this box came to me as trustee or through a public filing. That distinction mattered." My father would call anything damaging stolen. Grandma had prepared for the accusation. She showed me the first statement that made her suspicious. The reserve balance had fallen sharply, while the board summary reported no unusual disbursements. She called Caleb and asked whether the fund had paid a large employee claim. He told her the bank had corrected a duplicate posting. The next statement did not restore the money. Grandma asked again during Sunday dinner. Caleb changed his explanation. This time, he said emergency equipment had been purchased after a storm. "He gave me 2 answers for one number," she said. "That is when I began saving everything." She did not know I had been framed then. She knew only that the account and the board summaries disagreed. After the internal report blamed me, She compared its transaction list with her original statements. Several dates differed. One vendor name had been shortened. A payment described in the report as an electronic transfer appeared in her records as a check converted after deposit. The changes were small enough to look administrative unless someone possessed both versions. Grandma did. She removed a bundle of envelopes held with a blue rubber band. Each envelope carried a postmark establishing when the enclosed statement had been mailed. She had written the date received in pencil, but had otherwise left the contents untouched. "The report can be changed after the fact," she said. "A postmark is less cooperative." Next came public formation records for Northline Equipment Consulting and Red Creek Development Services. The listed organizers were professional registration agents, but both companies used the same mailing suite. The suite belonged to a property management office connected to Caleb. Grandma found that connection in a public business directory. The box also contained board notices, trustee correspondence, check images, and handwritten timelines. On several cards, recipe measurements had been replaced by transaction dates. I found my own name written beside 3 transfers. Conference in Denver Dental Surgery, absent all day. Badge record should show no entry. "You knew where I was? You told me about the conference. Your mother told me about the surgery before she stopped returning my calls." My mother had supported Douglas publicly. Whether she believed his story or chose the marriage over the question, I still did not know. Grandma had not relied on family memory alone. She kept the conference program I mailed her, and the hotel receipt I gave Arthur for tax advice. For the surgery date, she had only a calendar note. She had marked it for further verification. "This is not enough by itself," I said. "No." The answer surprised me. "The statements show the money left. The public records raise questions about where it went. They do not prove who used your account or who controlled the companies." She knew the limits of every page. For a year, Grandma had continued inviting Douglas and Caleb to dinner. She asked questions in the distracted tone they expected from an elderly woman. Had the company recovered from the bad storm season? Was the refinancing related to the employee fund? Why did Caleb receive mail at a suite downtown? They answered, because they did not think she understood enough to connect one reply to another. At one dinner, she asked whether Northline had supplied the portable generators the company used after a hurricane. Caleb said Northline specialized in water removal equipment. Douglas corrected him and said the company handled emergency procurement across several categories. Grandma apologized for confusing the details and served more potatoes. After they left, she retrieved the invoice from the recipe box. It billed for generators and industrial drying units but listed no serial numbers, delivery location, or receiving employee. Another Sunday, she asked whether Hollow Ridge was still costing Douglas money. He told her the project had been stabilized through private financing. 3 days later, the reserve statement showed a vendor check deposited into an account whose memo referenced Hollow Ridge interest. "Why keep inviting them?" I asked. "Because people notice when questions stop. They rarely notice when an old woman asks the same harmless question twice." Arthur had played his part too. He discussed baseball with Caleb while Grandma checked dates. He copied public filings at the library when online printouts cut off ownership fields. He drove her to the bank, but never entered meetings where his presence might make the request look like a family dispute. Their patience embarrassed me. I had spent the year making calls that ended in arguments. They had spent it collecting answers no argument could change. Arthur wanted to confront them after she discovered the second company. She refused. If Douglas knew I was collecting statements, he would remove me as trustee and spend the next month explaining why every missing page was routine, she said. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were angry enough to drive to the office every time a new rumor reached you." "I had a right to know. You had a right to the truth." I did not have the full truth yet. The final missing piece arrived 6 days earlier. It was a trustee notice concerning a recovered check image that the bank had been unable to attach to the earlier statements. The check came from Red Creek Development Services and paid interest owed by Hollow Ridge Development Partners, my father's failing real estate project. Douglas's name appeared as managing member of the development partnership. Another check from Northline had covered part of a personal guarantee associated with Caleb. The money had not stopped inside questionable vendors. It had continued into obligations belonging directly to my father and brother. Grandma placed those 2 check images on top of the admission agreement. "Your father learned how to build a company in my garage," she said. "He forgot I was the one balancing the books." I picked up my phone. "Who are you calling?" "Martin Shaw." "No." "He chairs the board. He also approved your termination using a report we have not yet disproved. If you call him now, he calls Douglas. Douglas calls the bank. Caleb calls whoever controls the server. By morning, every record we still need will become unavailable for a perfectly reasonable reason." Arthur placed a business card beside my phone. Leah Monroe, Corporate Fraud and Whistleblower Counsel. Grandma had consulted her 2 months earlier without giving her the box. Leah advised Ruth how to preserve original mail, keep a document log, and avoid collecting anything outside her trustee authority. She was waiting for the final bank record before taking formal action. "You already have a lawyer. We have someone who knows which mistake not to make first." The next morning, the 3 of us entered Leah's office through a side conference room. Grandma carried the recipe box. Arthur carried the admission agreement. I carried nothing because Leah did not want me rearranging documents I had first seen less than 24 hours earlier. Leah photographed the box before opening it. She recorded each item, its source, the date Grandma received it, and whether it was an original or copy. Envelopes stayed with their contents. Check images were matched to statements. Public filings went into a separate section. One statement had a coffee mark near the bottom. Grandma began apologizing until Leah asked when it happened. The morning it arrived. "Did you photograph it then?" Arthur produced a phone image with the date stored in its metadata. Leah added the image to the log. The stain did not damage the account information, but documenting it prevented someone from claiming the page had been altered later without explanation. Another envelope had been opened along the side because Grandma's letter opener tore the top. That went into the log too. The work was slow and undramatic. For the first time, that gave me comfort. My father had won by making the accusation move faster than verification. Leah refused to let our answer depend on the same mistake. "Chain of custody sounds dramatic," she said. "Most of the time, it means no one gets careless because a page appears helpful." I described what I had heard through the pantry door. Leah took notes, then closed that section of her pad. "What you heard explains the crime," she said. "What Ruth collected may prove it. We treat those as different things." Arthur and Grandma heard it too, and Douglas will say 3 angry relatives misunderstood a conversation about saving the company. We use the confession to guide the investigation, not replace it. She read the voluntary admission and restitution agreement. The agreement did more than confess. It waived claims against the company and its officers, accepted civil responsibility for the full shortage, authorized collection against future earnings, and declared that I had acted alone. "This is not a confession," Leah said. "It is a cleanup document for the people who framed you." She called Sofia Alvarez, a forensic accountant with experience in insurer and employee benefit investigations. Sofia arrived that afternoon carrying a laptop and 2 empty evidence cases. She did not tell me the records cleared me. She asked for the internal audit report, the dates my access had been disabled, my travel records, and the names of everyone with administrator privileges. "Douglas and Caleb," I said, "also the information technology director." "Who appointed the director?" Caleb. Sophia built an initial timeline across the conference table. 6 transfers, 2 vendors, 4 months, $640,000. 3 transactions occurred on dates Grandma believed I had been away. 1 happened after business hours when I was normally home. 2 could not yet be separated from my legitimate activity. The money did not disappear under your name, Sophia said. It traveled under somebody's instructions. We still have to prove whose. She assigned a status to every proposition. Confirmed, supported, unresolved. The missing balance was confirmed. The vendor accounts were confirmed. The connection to Hollow Ridge was supported by check images, but still required authentication from the receiving bank. The use of my credentials was confirmed. The identity of the person using them remained unresolved. I disliked seeing the most important question in the unresolved column. Sophia left it there. A weak investigation hides uncertainty, she said. A strong one labels it and keeps working. Leah demanded that the relevant emails, access logs, audit versions, badge records, and transaction metadata be preserved. Independent board counsel issued formal internal litigation holds, while the banks, insurer, auditor, and email provider received targeted preservation demands appropriate to the records each controlled. She did not send them immediately. First, outside counsel for the independent board members needed to receive a sealed copy of Grandma's core records. If Douglas reacted by controlling the internal systems, the evidence would already exist somewhere he did not control. Grandma watched me read the first bank statement again. I spent a year begging my family to believe me, I said. And I could have comforted you with belief, she replied. I chose to protect you with proof. Then she turned over the first check image, and for the first time in a year, I could see a path from the accusation to the people who had created it. Leah sent the preservation notices at 8 the next morning. By 8:15, my father called me for the first time in 11 months. I watched his name fill the screen until the call ended. He tried again. Then Caleb called. Neither left a message. At 9, Douglas called Grandma. She answered on speaker while Leah recorded the time and Arthur sat beside her. Mom, did Ethan visit you yesterday? You visited me yesterday. That was not my question. Then ask the question you mean. My father paused. Did you or Ethan contact the company's outside counsel? Why would a preservation notice worry an innocent company? He ended the call. Leah looked at Grandma. You enjoy this too much. I have waited a year to stop pretending I do not understand him. The first records arrived from the bank that afternoon. Because the employee reserve involved insurer obligations and a trustee dispute, the bank moved quickly. Sophia matched each withdrawal to the statements in the green box. All 6 transfers left the reserve through internal payment requests bearing my code. The receiving accounts belonged to Northline and Red Creek. From there, the money divided into 11 payments. 4 paid interest and carrying costs for Hollow Ridge Development Partners, the project controlled by Douglas. 3 covered obligations tied to Caleb's personal guarantee. 2 paid a deposit on land the development partnership hoped to purchase. The remainder passed through consulting invoices before returning to the same project. The vendors had no employees, equipment records, tax history consistent with procurement, or business addresses beyond the shared registration suite. Public ownership documents did not name Douglas or Caleb directly. They named holding companies. Sophia kept following them. Caleb was the authorized signer for Northline's bank account. Red Creek was owned by a company whose manager was Hollow Ridge Development Partners. Douglas had signed the partnership's loan extension personally. Can they say the vendors paid the project for legitimate services? I asked. They can say anything, Sophia replied. Our job is to see whether records say it with them. The records did not. No contracts describe legitimate work between the vendors and the project. Invoice numbers had been created in batches. Several invoices used identical language for equipment. One requested payment for flood pumps on a date when Ward Restoration Group had no flood response projects active. The money trail linked my father and brother to the benefit. It did not yet prove who had used my access. That required the system's evidence. Ward Restoration Group's Information Technology Director said older administrator logs had been overwritten under normal retention policy. The bank trail showed who benefited, but my credentials still connected me to the withdrawals, and the missing logs did not identify who had used them. Sophia looked beyond the systems Douglas controlled. The false emails had also touched an outside provider, the bank and the building access system. The email provider responded first. The confirmation messages sent from my account did not originate from my assigned laptop or usual network address. They came from a device registered to the operations department, Caleb's department. The provider retained the session identifier. Its authenticated response showed that the messages had been sent through an administrator recovery session, not in the ordinary way described by the audit. The outside auditor also preserved an earlier copy of the internal audit package. Its transaction appendix differed from the final report shown to the board. In the earlier version, 2 entries carried an unresolved administrator access flag. In the final version, that flag had disappeared, and a paragraph describing my supposed override had been added. The revision history identified Caleb as the person who uploaded the replacement file. He will say he corrected an incomplete draft, I said. Then we establish whether the correction was true, Leah replied. Badge records arrived next. For the $85,000 transfer, authenticated conference records placed me 2 states away, while my badge showed no entry. On the dental surgery date, the administrator's session began while limited medical verification showed I was under sedation. For a third transaction, building records placed Caleb on the executive floor minutes before the session began and showed him leaving after it ended. None of those facts alone proved every part of the scheme. Together, they made the internal report impossible to defend as a careful investigation. Sophia created a timeline with 4 parallel tracks: bank transfers, system access, badge activity, final destination of funds. The lines converged on Douglas and Caleb. The money did not disappear under Ethan's name, she said. It traveled under Douglas's instructions. I asked when we could release everything publicly. Leah said no. My father used speed to frame me. Yes, every day we wait gives him time to call more people, and every day we document gives those people something stronger than your anger. We use sequence to clear you. The insurer opened a confidential fraud review. Independent board counsel instructed Martin Shaw to convene a special meeting before the refinancing. The lender agreed to attend but paused final approval until the shortage and responsibility were reconsidered. Douglas did not know the full reason for the meeting. Outside counsel told him new trustee materials required review. He still believed the fastest solution was my signature. He circulated a confidential memorandum describing Grandma as an elderly trustee being manipulated by a desperate grandson. He warned that reopening the investigation could threaten refinancing, payroll, and hundreds of jobs. The memorandum did not address a single bank record. Martin forwarded it to outside counsel. Leah added it to the file and told me not to answer. He is moving the discussion from documents to loyalty, she said. That worked last time. Last time the board had only his report. My mother called Grandma that evening. I was in Leah's office when the call came. Ruth, Douglas says Ethan is using you to attack the company. Did Douglas tell you where the reserve money went? He said there were emergency decisions. That is not an answer. My mother began crying. Grandma told her only that authenticated records would be reviewed Thursday, and that no one should ask her to stop it. Afterward, I asked whether she thought my mother knew. I think she chose not to ask enough questions, Grandma said. Thursday may tell us whether that changes. He called again that evening. This time, I answered. Ethan. His voice softened on my name. I know the past year has been difficult. You made it difficult. We do not have time to repeat old arguments. The company can still give you a way forward. By calling me a thief in writing. By containing the consequences. Sign the agreement Thursday. The company will limit restitution and recommend closure of the criminal referral. You can rebuild somewhere else. Why does the bank need my signature now if the audit settled responsibility a year ago? He was quiet for half a second. The lender wants finality, or a release. Do not turn legal language into another excuse. Caleb has children. Hundreds of employees depend on this refinancing. One signature allows everyone to move on. Everyone, he exhaled. Someone had to absorb the damage, Ethan. I am trying to make sure the damage ends with you, instead of spreading to the whole company. The sentence was not a confession. It was close enough to remind me why Grandma had hidden me, and far too vague to clear my name. Send the final agreement to Leah Monroe, I said. His tone changed. You hired a fraud attorney. I hired someone to explain what you want me to sign. Are you coming Thursday? I looked at Grandma's recipe box on Leah's evidence table. Yes. My father heard surrender because he needed to hear it. Caleb called 10 minutes later. Good decision, he said. Sign it, and everyone can move on. Did you prepare the agreement? Company counsel did. The version that releases you personally? Standard language. And the paragraph saying I acted alone? You did act alone. I waited. He filled the silence. Look, you already look guilty. Fighting now only makes it worse. The signature just makes the resolution useful. It was almost the same sentence I had heard from the pantry. I did not challenge him. Leah had warned me that people preparing a false story often reveal more when they believe the listener has stopped resisting. What happens after I sign? I asked. The refinancing closes. The reserve is restored. Dad keeps the company. You get a payment schedule you can survive. And Hollow Ridge? Silence. What does that have to do with anything? Nothing, apparently. He ended the call. The final agreement arrived the next morning. Leah compared it with the copy Caleb had left at Grandma's house. The new version added a statement that I had voluntarily concealed the vendor ownership and acted without knowledge or assistance from any officer or director. It also contained a confidentiality clause preventing me from discussing the underlying transactions. I read the signature page longer than I expected. The agreement offered a fixed restitution plan instead of open investigations, but it could not prevent public authorities from acting. I would confess, waive my claims, owe money, and still carry the risk. I pushed it back to Leah. The document was no longer only an attempt to assign responsibility. It was designed to contradict the evidence before the evidence became public. Outside counsel preserved both versions. Sophia completed beneficial ownership records for the two vendors. Northline's banking resolution bore Caleb's signature. Red Creek transferred money to a development account, requiring Douglas's personal approval for withdrawals above $50,000. One of the disputed payments exceeded that amount and carried his authorization. He could not blame the entire scheme on Caleb. Without explaining his own signature on the account that received the money, the Information Technology Director requested separate counsel. Through that lawyer, he disclosed that Caleb had ordered him to reset my account password during what Caleb called an emergency audit test. He also preserved a message directing him to shorten server log retention after my termination. Leah treated the statement as a lead, not a fact. Outside counsel obtained the message from the company archive and matched its timestamp. By Wednesday evening, the case no longer depended on anyone believing Grandma, Arthur, or me. The green box still mattered because it contained the original records from before the audit package changed. But it now sat inside a larger file built from independent sources. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 Thursday morning. Douglas expected the directors, lender, insurer, outside auditor, and company counsel. He knew Grandma would attend as trustee. He did not know why Leah and Sophia had been added to the agenda. Martin Shaw called me privately. If the evidence is what outside counsel says, the board failed you. The board believed a report. We failed to verify who controlled it. Will you say that when my father is in the room? Yes, I wanted to believe him. I no longer needed to. Thursday morning, I put on the same Navy suit I had worn when the board fired me. Grandma carried the green recipe box. Arthur stayed home because his doctor had told him to avoid unnecessary strain, and because Ruth's presence alone was already more than Douglas expected. Before we left, Arthur held my shoulder. You can win an argument today, or you can get your name back. Do not confuse them. At 9:52, I entered Ward Restoration Group for the first time in a year. Douglas believed I was coming to sign away my name. He did not know Grandma's recipe box had already been entered into evidence. The receptionist recognized me and looked down before I reached the security desk. A temporary badge waited under my name. Visitor for 9 years. I had entered that building as an officer of the company. Now I followed my 82-year-old grandmother through the lobby while she carried the box that could explain why I had been removed. The special meeting took place in the main boardroom. Douglas sat at the head of the table. Caleb occupied my former seat. Martin Shaw and the other independent directors faced them. The lender, insurer, outside auditor and counsel joined in person or by secure video. The voluntary admission and restitution agreement lay before an empty chair beside my father. He stood when I entered. Ethan, I am glad you decided to take responsibility. He glanced at Grandma's recipe box and almost smiled. Mom, we are not staying for lunch. Neither am I. Leah and Sophia entered behind us carrying sealed evidence files. My father's smile disappeared. Martin opened the meeting by stating that newly received trustee records required reconsideration of the prior internal findings. Douglas interrupted before he finished. The matter was resolved a year ago. My son is here to execute the admission so the company can complete refinancing. He touched the agreement. I am giving Ethan one final chance to take responsibility. I sat down and picked up the pen. Caleb leaned back. Relief moved across his face too quickly for anyone else to notice. I did not sign. Before I take responsibility, I said, perhaps we should establish whose responsibility it is. Leah took the pen from my hand and placed it beside the agreement. Sophia connected her laptop to the boardroom display. The first page contained no accusation. It contained a timeline, 6 transfers. 2 supposed vendors, $640,000. She began with the reserve statements. Grandma provided the originals she received as trustee, together with the postmarked envelopes. The bank had authenticated matching records. Douglas folded his arms. No one disputes that money left the reserve. Ethan approved it. Sophia displayed the receiving accounts. Northline Equipment Consulting and Red Creek Development Services had billed Ward Restoration Group for emergency equipment. Neither company owned equipment, employed staff, or maintained a business location beyond a registration suite. The lender's representative asked who controlled the accounts. Sophia opened the banking resolutions. Caleb was Northline's authorized signer. Red Creek belonged to a holding company managed by Hollow Ridge Development Partners. My father's real estate project, Caleb leaned forward. Those companies performed consulting work. My name on an account does not prove misuse. Then we follow the payments, Sophia said. 4 transfers paid interest and carrying costs for Hollow Ridge. 3 covered obligations connected to Caleb's personal guarantee. 2 funded a land deposit. The remaining invoices moved through consulting accounts before reaching the same project. The screen showed dates, check numbers, and destination accounts. Douglas turned to company counsel. This presentation contains privileged development information. Outside counsel answered instead. The board authorized disclosure for the special review. My father looked toward Martin as though the chairman had forgotten who built the company. Sophia moved to system access. The confirmation emails from my account had originated through an administrator recovery session. The company's oldest logs were missing, but the email provider retained the session identifiers. They came from an operations device, not my assigned laptop. Caleb said administrator sessions were common during audit testing. Sophia displayed the message ordering the information technology director to reset my password for an emergency test. Caleb had sent it. Then she displayed his later instruction shortening server log retention after my termination. That was a storage decision, Caleb said. Made 3 days after outside counsel asked that audit records be preserved, replied. Caleb looked at Douglas. My father did not look back. The badge timeline came next. One transfer occurred while I was registered at a conference 2 states away. My hotel record and conference check-in placed me there. My badge never entered company property. Another administrator session began while dental records showed I was under sedation. Again, my badge showed no entry. On a 3rd date, Caleb entered the executive floor minutes before the session began and left minutes after it ended. The outside auditor asked why those conflicts did not appear in the internal report. Sophia displayed 2 versions. The earlier audit package contained unresolved administrator access flags. The final package removed them and added a paragraph saying I had overridden controls from my office. The replacement file had been uploaded by Caleb. Martin turned toward him. Did you alter the audit package? I corrected an incomplete draft. What source established that Ethan was in his office? Caleb looked at the screen. The transaction metadata, which had been generated after you reset his access. He did not answer. Douglas stood. This is becoming a trial conducted without context. We had a liquidity crisis. Emergency decisions were made to protect the company and its employees. The insurer's representatives spoke from the screen. Were employee reserve funds knowingly used for the Hollow Ridge project, temporarily? It was the first admission he made in the room. Did the board authorize that use? The board would not have understood the urgency. Martin's expression changed. You did not ask us because there was no time. There was time to prepare 6 false vendor invoices. My father looked at me. You would destroy this company to clear yourself? You destroyed my name to save it. Those are not the same thing. He came around the table. Everything you had came from this company, including the accusation. I gave you a career. Then you used it to make me a believable thief. Caleb interrupted. Dad made the decision. I followed instructions. Sophia opened the Northline account records again. You formed the vendor, controlled its account, transmitted invoices, requested the password reset, altered the audit package, and received payment against your personal guarantee. Caleb's attempt to step away from my father ended before he left his chair. Douglas pointed at Grandma's recipe box. None of this began with an auditor. It began with an old woman collecting documents she did not understand. Grandma placed both hands on the green lid. I was balancing your books before Caleb learned to spell his last name. She opened the box and removed the original statement that first showed the missing funds. You sent me this because you forgot I was still trustee. Then you sent a board summary that did not match it. I did not need to understand your real estate project. I needed to subtract one balance from another. The room remained quiet. Martin asked Leah about the admission agreement. She displayed the 2 versions. Both required me to accept sole responsibility and release Douglas, Caleb, and the company. The later version added a statement that no officer or director knew about the vendors and prohibited me from discussing the transactions. This agreement would not merely resolve an old claim, Leah said. It would create a signed account contradicting the records now before the board. The lender's representative confirmed that the bank had required a resolution of responsibility, not a confession from any particular person. Douglas had presented my admission as the only route to refinancing. The insurer confirmed its fraud review was open. Outside counsel stated that relevant evidence had been preserved and referred to appropriate authorities for independent review. No police entered the boardroom. No one announced prison sentences. The immediate decisions belonged to the board. Martin called for a vote to suspend Douglas and Caleb from all management authority, system access, and control over company records pending investigation. The vote passed. My father stared at directors who had praised him for decades. "This is a family matter." Martin shook his head. It stopped being a family matter when company money was used to finance it. Then he looked at me. A family accusation became a corporate finding because this board failed to verify it. "We'll correct the record through the same formal channels we used to condemn you." I had imagined that sentence for a year. Hearing it did not return the interviews, friendships, or nights I spent reading accusations until dawn. It did something more useful. It entered the truth into the minutes. Douglas tried once more. "Ethan, tell them this can be resolved inside the family." I looked at the agreement, the forensic timeline, and Grandma's recipe box. "You taught everyone to doubt my word," I said. Grandma made sure I would never need it. The meeting adjourned without my signature. Formal vindication took longer. The board withdrew the internal audit finding and commissioned a fully independent investigation. The insurer dismissed its civil claim against me after reviewing the bank and system evidence. Months later, the criminal inquiry involving me was closed with written confirmation that I was not considered responsible for the missing funds. The independent review lasted nearly 5 months. Investigators interviewed employees who had helped prepare the original audit, recovered archived messages, and verified each transfer with the banks that received it. I answered the same questions more than once, because a correction needed to survive the scrutiny the first report had avoided. During that period, I was no longer the person the board publicly blamed, but I was not yet formally cleared by every institution. One background check still returned the old civil claim. A recruiter withdrew an interview after finding the original company notice online. Leah documented both incidents and sent the updated board resolution. She did not threaten dramatic lawsuits. She required corrections to move through the same channels as the accusation. Ward Restoration Group removed the original statement from its active website, but preserved it for the investigation. When the independent report was complete, the company published a correction with equal visibility and sent it directly to employees, vendors, insurers, lenders, and professional associations. The correction named the failures. My approvals had been generated through administrator access. The vendors were controlled by company officers. The prior audit package had been materially altered. I had not received or benefited from the missing funds. That language mattered more than a sentence saying the company regretted confusion. Nia, the payroll supervisor who had called me after my termination, contacted me again. "I should have stayed on the phone," she said. "You were afraid for your job. So were a lot of people." That is how the report became the truth inside the building. She did not ask me to forgive her. She sent a written account to the independent investigators describing how quickly Caleb distributed the accusation before the board minutes were final. Her statement became part of the review. My mother wrote again after the correction. This time, the letter contained an apology and several questions. I was not ready to answer either. When the independent investigation concluded, Caleb was terminated for cause. Douglas resigned before the board could vote on his permanent removal. Neither man returned to management, and the company's civil recovery claims against both continued alongside the government reviews. Caleb tried to cooperate by blaming our father, but his vendor account, audit revisions, and personal benefit remained in the file. The refinancing did not close on Friday. The lender later negotiated a different restructuring under independent management to protect employees without restoring Douglas or Caleb to control. Some people apologized. Martin did so in writing and in person. 2 former friends called. One recruiter who had rejected me offered to reopen a position as though the missing year were an administrative delay. I declined. Clearing my name did not require returning to every room that had closed its door. I accepted the corrections and chose which relationships deserved another conversation. I did not return to Ward Restoration Group. A formal correction could restore my professional standing, but it could not make the company feel safe again. Sophia introduced me to a nonprofit that helped employee-owned businesses strengthen internal controls after fraud. I began as a consultant reviewing approval systems and conflicts of interest. Several months later, I opened a small forensic controls practice of my own. My first client hired me because of what had happened, not despite it. I made one rule for the practice. No internal accusation would be treated as complete until someone outside the reporting chain verified the source records. It was not a revolutionary policy. It was the ordinary safeguard my family's company had abandoned when the founder needed a convenient answer. Caleb sent a message saying we were still brothers. I answered once. You are my brother when my name needed defending, not after the evidence defended it for you. Douglas requested a private meeting. His attorney said he wanted to explain the pressure he had faced and the employees he had tried to protect. I replied through Leah that I had already heard his explanation from behind a pantry door. I did not promise never to speak to him again. I refused to let his need for forgiveness create another deadline for me. Grandma returned the green recipe box to her pantry after outside counsel released the original documents. Leah kept authenticated copies. The bank retained its records. The box no longer needed to carry the case. On her next birthday, I drove 3 hours again. This time I called first. Arthur opened the door and inspected the hallway behind me. No one to hide from, I asked. Give your family time. Grandma had removed the statements, check images, and timelines from the recipe box. Bread, cakes, and Sunday dinner were back at the front. She handed me an apple pie card written in her narrow handwriting. On the back, she had added one sentence. The truth takes longer when cooked properly. Do not rush it. I told her it was a terrible accounting principle. She told me to eat the pie. My father took one afternoon to destroy my name. Grandma spent a year giving it back to me, one receipt at a time. If your own father framed you to save the family company, would clearing your name be enough? Or would the moment he chose you as the sacrifice end the relationship permanently?